On a suffocating August night in 1851, the Virginia sky glowed orange from the fires of curing tobacco and from something darker burning at Belmont Estate. A single entry in a slave trader's ledger would mark the beginning of one of the strangest, most horrifying obsessions in American history. It read simply, "One specimen, age 19, purchased from Charleston Market, unique physical characteristics." Within 14 months, 3 men would be dead, a 30,000-acre plantation would stand abandoned, and every record tied to its owner would be deliberately destroyed. Yet, the story refused to die. It survived through whispers, in the diaries of overseers, in the terrified recollections of men who swore they'd never return to that land again. What could drive powerful men, respected masters of the Old South, into madness so complete that they would erase their own names from history? What secret was so shameful, so unholy, that even the courts ordered rooms sealed forever? Tonight, we open those locked doors. And what lies inside isn't supernatural. It's far worse because it's human. Before we step into Belmont's ruins and uncover what really happened behind its walls, make sure you're part of this journey. Subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, where history's forgotten nightmares are resurrected in the dark. Tap that bell so you never miss the stories they tried to bury. And hey, tell me, where are you watching from? I read every comment, and tonight, I want to know who's brave enough to enter Belmont with me. On a humid August night in 1851, the air over Southside Virginia felt like breathing through wet linen. Heat rippled across the tobacco fields, and cicadas screamed into the dark like a chorus of dying engines. In the ledgers of a slave trader named Samuel Wickham, one peculiar entry glowed beneath candlelight. "One specimen, age 19, purchased from Charleston Market, unique physical characteristics. Price, $2,847. Even the ink seemed uneasy, as if it knew what followed. The buyer, Thomas Rutledge, owner of the vast Belmont Estate, had inherited both wealth and ruin. 30,000 acres of Virginia earth stretched beneath his boots, yet his nights were empty, filled only with echoing footsteps through corridors too quiet for a living man. Thomas was 37. Tall, sharp-featured, and carved by discipline. His ancestors' portraits glared down from the great hall walls, men in powdered wigs who had ruled tobacco and flesh with identical detachment. Their eyes seemed to whisper that he was the last capable heir. But what they didn't see was the slow corrosion behind his composure. His laughter had dried into dust. His days had turned mechanical, moving from ledger to field to silence. Inside, he felt nothing but an ever-widening void. It was into this emptiness that Samuel Wickham arrived one morning, dust-coated and sweating through his worn black suit. His carriage rattled to a stop before the main house, and with it came something unseen, a subtle chill that didn't belong to August. Wickham specialized in the unusual. He was a trader of men the way others collected oddities, seeking those with peculiar skills or rare deformities that fascinated the wealthy. He thrived on curiosity, the darker kind, the kind money couldn't name aloud. Thomas met him in his office, a narrow room lined with law books and the scent of ink and tobacco. The window shutters were half closed, slicing sunlight into bars that looked like a cage across the floorboards. Wickham smiled the way men do when they're about to profit from sin. "Mr. Rutledge," he began, pouring himself a glass of whiskey uninvited, "I've brought you something you won't find anywhere else in Virginia. Something truly exceptional." Thomas leaned back, expression cold. "I'm not in need of more workers, Mr. Wickham." The sentence was rehearsed, habitual, an armor forged from disinterest. But Wickham only grinned wider, sensing the tremor beneath his host's voice. "This isn't a field hand," Wickham said, lowering his tone. "This one's different. Born in New Orleans, raised by a physician, educated, obedient, healthy, and unlike any man you've ever seen. A rarity even nature seldom attempts twice. Thomas's brows knit. What exactly do you mean? His voice was even, but something behind his ribs shifted. That spark of interest he despised in himself, the one that made him human. Wickham opened his satchel and slid across a folded document. The paper smelled faintly of brine and decay. A case of medical curiosity, he murmured. Half of one thing, half of another. A phenomenon. Imagine what men of learning would pay to witness it. Thomas read the physician's notes, anatomical sketches, descriptions couched in the language of science, yet trembling with fascination. The words perfect dual form repeated several times. He exhaled slowly, setting the paper down like something alive. Why bring this to me? He asked. Surely there are others more suited for exhibitions? Wickham's grin turned thin. Because I know refinement when I see it. You're not a carnival man, Mr. Rutledge. You're a collector of truth. The word truth hung in the air like smoke. Outside, thunder murmured in the distance, a sound so low it seemed to vibrate through the glass panes. Thomas stood, crossed to the window, and stared out at the distant barns. Bring him in, Thomas said. His voice was quiet, resigned, but something in it pulsed. Curiosity, guilt, maybe both. Wickham nodded, signaling through the doorway. This is Jordan, Wickham announced. He reads, writes, obeys. Trained to remain still during examination. He understands his role. Go on, boy. Introduce yourself. Jordan lifted his gaze. His voice, when it came, was soft yet steady, a tone that seemed to settle somewhere between strength and gentleness. My name is Jordan, sir. I serve faithfully. I am what I was made to be. The room tilted slightly in Thomas's perception. The sound of that voice didn't fit the form before him. Every word felt deliberate, sculpted from something neither defiance nor submission, something in between. Thomas's throat tightened. He studied the figure before him, not in lust or pity, but confusion. The symmetry of features, the almost unnatural calm, the quiet understanding in Jordan's gaze. The world seemed smaller, suddenly insufficient to describe him. I'll take him, Thomas said, the words escaping before thought could catch them. Wickham's eyebrows flicked upward in satisfaction. 2,800, as agreed? Yes. Thomas's hand trembled as he signed the draft. By noon, Wickham was gone, his wagon vanishing into the red dust road. Thomas stood in the doorway of the cottage at the edge of the gardens, a modest structure long unused. You'll stay here, he said quietly, until I decide otherwise. Jordan nodded once. Yes, master. He spoke the word without bitterness, without reverence. It was simply factual, the way one might state a sunrise. That unshakable neutrality unnerved Thomas more than open rebellion ever could. The cottage smelled of dust and cedar. Inside, sunlight filtered through the warped shutters in thin, golden lines. Jordan stood motionless, the stillness of someone who'd learned that silence was survival. Thomas left him there and returned to the main house. His mind churned with thoughts he couldn't categorize. Fascination, fear, perhaps relief that something, anything, had pierced the suffocating sameness of his life. That night, as rain began tapping against the windows, Thomas sat alone in his study. The whiskey burned down his throat as he stared at the flickering firelight, seeing not flames but Jordan's eyes, calm, endless, unreadable. He told himself it was scientific interest, a curiosity of anatomy, nothing more. Yet the lie soured even as it formed. The fire hissed, throwing sparks like fragments of a truth he didn't want to name. By midnight, the storm outside deepened. Wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere beyond the garden, a door creaked in the darkness, the sound of the world shifting, aligning toward ruin. Thomas rose, moved to the window, and looked toward the faint outline of the cottage. A candle still burned within, steady and unwavering despite the wind. He told himself he would visit tomorrow. But even then, he knew tomorrow would not bring understanding. It would bring the beginning of something that would unmake every man who touched it, starting with him. And in that moment, under the slow thunder rolling across the Virginia sky, Thomas Rutledge understood nothing except this. He had purchased far more than a man. He had bought the reflection of his own decay. Morning broke over Belmont Estate with a haze that dulled every color into shades of rust and ash. The rain had stopped, but the ground still bled moisture, as if the earth itself refused to heal. Thomas awoke before dawn, his body rigid from sleeplessness. The air in his room carried the faint scent of wet tobacco and smoldered oak. Beneath it lingered something stranger, curiosity, sharpened like the edge of guilt. He dressed in silence, each button of his waistcoat fastening like a confession. Outside, fog clung low to the fields. The slave quarters sat still and quiet beyond the trees, their chimneys exhaling the breath of other men's labor. He walked toward the cottage at the garden's edge, boots sinking into wet soil. Birds stirred weakly in the hedges, their morning songs sounding cautious, as though even nature had learned to whisper around that place. When Thomas opened the door, he found Jordan standing beside the window, already awake. The man's posture was immaculate, hands clasped, gaze steady, as though sleep itself had never dared to touch him. "You may sit," Thomas said, but Jordan didn't move. "I'm not permitted to sit unless commanded twice, sir." The words fell without arrogance or fear, merely truth shaped by years of conditioning. "Then sit," Thomas repeated, softer. Jordan obeyed with fluid precision. Sunlight cut through the shutters and framed his profile like the subject of a painter's obsession. The silence between them hummed with something unspoken. Thomas asked questions that morning, not cruel, not kind, only searching. "Can you read this?" He slid a ledger across the table. Jordan read aloud with perfect clarity, voice even, measured, almost hypnotic. Each syllable seemed to rewrite the air. Thomas leaned forward, elbows on knees, listening not for meaning but for tone, the rhythm of a life unbroken by brutality, yet reshaped by it entirely. "You were educated," Thomas murmured. Jordan nodded once. "By my first owner. He was a physician. He said knowledge made obedience cleaner." The line struck Thomas like a knife disguised as philosophy. As the day wore on, Thomas found himself unable to leave. He studied Jordan's movements, the stillness, the way his eyes flickered like candlelight against logic. He told himself it was curiosity, not fixation. But obsession is patient. It begins like dust in sunlight, invisible, harmless, until it gathers into something heavy enough to change the air. By evening, the master felt that weight settling behind his ribs. He returned to the cottage again at dusk, uninvited, carrying a lantern and 2 books, anatomy volumes bound in cracked leather. "Do you understand drawings?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Jordan replied. "Better than words." They studied together by the flickering light. Thomas traced the diagrams of bone and sinew, watching Jordan's expression remain perfectly neutral. Yet the stillness was deceptive. Understanding shimmered beneath every restrained breath. When the lantern finally died, neither man moved to relight it. The dark became a language of its own, heavy, magnetic, terrifying. Thomas stood abruptly, murmuring something about work, though no work awaited him. That night he didn't sleep. He paced the halls, the floorboards creaking like old regrets. His reflection in the window glass looked older, thinner, eyes hollowed by questions no one sane should ask. The next morning, his overseer found him in the yard, standing in the mist. "Sir," the man said hesitantly, "shall I send the workers to the south field?" Thomas didn't answer right away. "Do as you always have." Routine kept the estate alive, but barely. The men whispered about the master's absences, the strange light glowing each night from the garden cottage, the sound of voices long past midnight. By the third week, Thomas had moved Jordan into the main house, officially to assist with record-keeping. Unofficially, he wanted proximity. He told himself it was efficiency. The lie fit poorly, but tightly enough. Jordan adapted to the new quarters with eerie ease. He swept the floors, prepared the study, kept meticulous accounts. His handwriting was elegant, too elegant, like the echo of someone else's education. At meals, Thomas found himself watching the man's hands. They moved with a craftsman's grace, quiet yet deliberate. It was the kind of control one gained only after years of living without any. One evening, a storm rolled through, black and crackling. The house shook under its weight. Thomas sat at his desk, unable to focus. Lightning illuminated the doorway. Jordan stood there, silent, holding a candle. "The windows in the east corridor are leaking, sir," he said. His tone carried no fear, but the flicker of candlelight painted his face with ghostly symmetry. Thomas nodded slowly. "Fix them tomorrow." Jordan turned to leave. "Wait." The word escaped before Thomas could recall it. The man froze, still as marble. "Do you believe," Thomas began carefully, "that a man can be two things at once and still be whole?" Jordan's eyes met his. "Every man is two things, sir. The one the world sees, and the one that stares back at him when the world turns away." The words landed like scripture written in ash. After Jordan left, Thomas sat alone for hours, the storm fading into memory. His chest felt tight, not with guilt, but recognition. Something inside him was breaking open, quietly, beautifully, fatally. Days bled into weeks. The household noticed his absence from the fields. Meals went untouched, books piled on his desk like monuments to obsession. Jordan's presence filled the halls like an echo of thought. The overseer, Miles, approached him one morning. "Sir, the buyers from Richmond—" "Later," Thomas interrupted. "There's something more pressing." His eyes glimmered with the dull shine of men too far gone to see the edge. That evening, Jordan found Thomas in the study, surrounded by open journals. "Do you think souls can be divided?" Thomas asked without looking up. "I think they already are," Jordan replied. "That's why men build cages, to keep the halves from meeting." A silence followed that seemed to stretch beyond time. The candlelight bent between them like a wire pulled to snapping. Outside, rain began again, gentle, rhythmic, relentless, like the heartbeat of something buried. Each night after that, Thomas read aloud. Passages of philosophy, anatomy, scripture twisted into madness. Jordan listened without judgment, the two men orbiting a gravity too dark to name. And with every word spoken, every silence shared, Belmont Estate decayed further. The walls grew damp, the books mildewed, and the men who worked the fields began to speak of ghosts walking after sundown. But no ghost haunted Belmont. Only two men trapped in a mirror too small for both their reflections. Only hunger masquerading as understanding. Only the slow unraveling of what remained human inside them. When Thomas finally looked at Jordan one night, truly looked, he no longer saw a servant or a curiosity. He saw himself, stripped of pretense, a soul divided, trying desperately to understand its own ruin. And that, perhaps, was the first true horror of Belmont. Not the cruelty of power, nor the sins of ownership, but the terrifying recognition that sometimes the thing we enslave is the thing we already are. Outside, thunder rolled again, far off yet approaching. The candle between them trembled in its dish, its flame bowing under an unseen breath. The night was listening, the house too, and neither would ever forget. Winter arrived like a slow suffocation. The once green fields of Belmont turned gray beneath the frost. and the wind carried the scent of rot from barns that hadn't seen proper work in weeks. Thomas stood on the veranda, staring across his estate as though watching the aftermath of someone else's life. The fences leaned, the fields lay fallow, and the world he'd inherited seemed to dissolve beneath his boots. Inside the house, Jordan moved silently, tending fires that barely warmed the air. Every step echoed against hollow halls, each sound swallowed by the kind of quiet that only comes after purpose has died. The overseer, Miles, approached Thomas one morning. "Sir, the ledgers, they're weeks behind. We're losing ground." Thomas didn't look up. "Then let it be lost." Miles hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the cottage beyond the gardens. "It's that man, isn't it?" Thomas's gaze cut through him like cold steel. "Mind the fields, Miles. Leave the house to me." The overseer nodded, retreating with the slow gait of someone walking away from a man already buried. That night, Thomas sat in the study with Jordan. The fire burned low, its light crawling up the walls like dying breath. Between them, a silence stretched, tense, heavy, alive. "Do you dream, Jordan?" Thomas asked. "Sometimes," came the reply. "But in my dreams I'm always watching, never waking, never choosing." Thomas leaned forward, elbows on knees. "And when you watch, what do you see?" "Men destroying what they think they own." The words landed like a confession. Outside, frost traced the windows in fragile veins. Inside, something older and colder crept through the room, remorse masquerading as revelation. Thomas closed his eyes. "You think I'm one of them?" Jordan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was acknowledgement enough. The clock on the mantel ticked, each second a slow erosion of control, each breath another step toward collapse. By mid-December, the estate's decay became undeniable. Workers whispered about the master's absence, the uncollected wages, the accounts gone unpaid. The mansion, once filled with laughter and command, now stood like a mausoleum still pretending to live. Jordan began keeping the ledgers himself, not because he was asked, but because he couldn't bear the emptiness. His handwriting filled pages with a calm precision that felt like prayer, each number a ritual of endurance. Thomas drifted through the halls, gaunt and hollow-eyed, his thoughts circling the same unanswerable question. What had he brought into his house? He no longer believed in science or reason. He believed only in consequence. One night, a mirror cracked in the east corridor with a sound sharp as thunder. The servants crossed themselves. Thomas stared at the fractured glass and saw his reflection split clean down the middle. In the days that followed, his mind unraveled further. He stopped eating, stopped shaving, stopped pretending that order could be restored. He began writing letters he never sent, to no one, to himself, to God. Each letter began the same. "Forgive me, for I misunderstood what I purchased." Each ended without signature, as though the name Thomas Rutledge no longer belonged to any living man. Jordan, watching from a distance, said nothing. But when Thomas collapsed one evening near the library, Jordan was there, lifting him gently, settling him before the fire. The master's eyes flickered open. "Why do you stay?" Jordan's voice was calm. "Because I was taught that endurance is survival, and survival is its own rebellion." Thomas laughed weakly, the sound more like breaking glass. "Then you've outlived every man I've ever known." Snow came early that year. The grounds turned white, disguising decay with beauty. From the road, Belmont still looked noble. Only those within its walls knew it had already fallen. The overseer left before Christmas. He took 3 men with him and never returned. The others worked without orders, held together only by habit and fear. The estate ran on inertia, like a dying heart refusing to stop. Inside, Thomas began to see figures in the corners of rooms, men shaped from shadow and memory. Sometimes he spoke to them, Sometimes they answered. Each voice sounded like his own. Jordan noticed the change but didn't intervene. Madness, he'd learned, was a private kingdom. To enter uninvited was to become part of it. He simply kept tending the fires, kept the house alive a little longer. One night, Thomas called him to the study. The air smelled of smoke and rain. "Do you believe in redemption?" he asked. "Only if it's earned," Jordan replied. "Then I'm damned," Thomas whispered. Jordan looked at him, really looked, and said quietly, "No, sir. Damned men don't know they're damned. You still do." For a moment, something human flickered behind Thomas's eyes. Then it vanished again. By January, the world outside Belmont forgot the name Rutledge. Letters went unanswered, debts unpaid, invitations returned unopened. The house stood like an island of ruin surrounded by the indifferent tide of time. Jordan continued his duties as though the estate still mattered. He polished silver no one used, stacked firewood no one would burn, and listened to Thomas pacing through sleepless nights. The final storm came on a night of black wind and blue lightning. Rain pounded the windows like fists. Thomas stood at the study door, drenched and shaking, his candle sputtering in the draft. "Jordan," he said, voice raw, "tell me there's still something left to save." The younger man looked at him and answered without emotion. "There's always something left, just not always worth saving." Thomas smiled, a hollow, broken thing. "Then I suppose this is all that's left of me." He turned toward the window, thunder booming as though the heavens mocked his epiphany. When the storm finally passed, dawn revealed a shattered world. The gardens were flooded, the barns collapsed, and the last of the workers were gone. Only two men remained, Thomas and Jordan, caretakers of an ending. In the silence that followed, Thomas spoke once more. "If I let you go, will you forgive me?" Jordan's eyes softened. "Freedom doesn't ask forgiveness. It only waits to be given." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then take it." He handed Jordan the papers, signed, sealed, irrevocable. The chains, at least on paper, were broken. Jordan said nothing. He only bowed once and walked into the pale morning light. Thomas watched him disappear down the road until the fog swallowed him whole. For a moment, the master almost smiled. Then he turned back toward the empty house, its windows staring like blind eyes into nothing. That afternoon, smoke rose from the chimney for the last time. The neighbors would later say they saw firelight dancing in the upper windows, but no flames ever spread. The house burned only on the inside. By nightfall, Belmont was silent again. The snow fell heavier, burying footprints, erasing paths, covering everything that had once been alive beneath the soft mercy of forgetting. And somewhere beyond the hills, a freed man walked alone beneath a sky that refused to clear, carrying with him the last echoes of a world built on ruin, a world finally learning how to die. When spring came to Virginia, Belmont no longer existed. The once great mansion stood blackened and broken, its chimneys like gravestones, its fields swallowed by weeds that fed on memory and silence. Only men from neighboring farms dared to approach, drawn by curiosity and dread. They found nothing but ashes and fragments, melted glass, warped iron, the faint scent of something long dead. The locals whispered that the master had gone mad, that his obsession had consumed him whole. Some said he vanished into the woods. Others claimed he still walked the estate when the moon rose full. But the truth was quieter than rumor. It lived not in ghost stories or superstition, but in the marks left by human hands, the ledger books half burned, the footprints that ended abruptly at the gate. Among those who searched was a young surveyor named Elias Ward, a man who believed every ruin hid a story worth mapping. He arrived one gray morning, his boots sinking into the soft earth that had once been a garden. Elias found the charred outline of walls, the shattered steps leading nowhere, and beside them, a single iron key. He held it up to the light, wondering what it had once locked or freed. Further north, a merchant in Petersburg held a sealed box sent months earlier by a man named Rutledge. Inside lay deeds, letters, and one note. Let no one reopen what was meant to stay buried. Still, the merchant read every word. He learned of Jordan, the enslaved man freed in the final days before the fire. He learned of obsession, of ruin, of one man's slow descent into the pit of his own reflection. He sold the papers quietly to a historian, who sold them again to a lawyer, until all trace of the documents vanished into archives that forgot their own shelves. Yet the story refused extinction. Men who worked nearby spoke of strange lights in the ruins at night, like lanterns moving against the wind. One swore he heard footsteps pacing, measured, patient, unending. Another found a journal half buried near the well. The writing inside was warped by smoke, but legible enough to read, "Redemption is a circle. The fire doesn't end it. It begins again with whoever finds the ashes." Elias read those words aloud. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. The ruins pressed in with a presence thicker than air, and the silence hummed with breath that did not belong to wind or bird. He left before dusk, but the memory clung to him. That night, as he camped near the river, he dreamed of two men, one standing, one walking away, and the sound of chains falling into mud. Months passed, but the land refused to settle. Grass grew, then withered, trees sprouted, then split. Even nature seemed unable to decide whether to reclaim or reject the soil soaked with human grief. When surveyors returned to map the county lines, they found their compasses spinning wildly near Belmont's remains. The instruments trembled, as if the earth itself had forgotten which way was north. Elias came back one final time, compelled by something he couldn't name. He found the key again where he'd left it, half buried, gleaming faintly beneath moss. Without hesitation, he pocketed it. He built a small cabin near the ruins, just one room, one chair, one table. Each night he wrote by lamplight, transcribing what he remembered from Rutledge's letters, filling the gaps with the rhythm of dreams. He wrote not as a historian, but as a witness reborn. His handwriting changed over time, growing sharper, tighter, more deliberate, until even he admitted it no longer looked like his own. Travelers who passed by saw the glow of his lamp through the trees. Some stopped to ask directions. Others avoided the area entirely, claiming the man there spoke as though others lived with him. They said he held long conversations with someone unseen, sometimes in anger, sometimes in calm, as if debating the nature of guilt itself. They said his laughter came rarely, and never twice the same. Years drifted by. Elias aged faster than he should have. His eyes darkened, his hands trembled, but his writing never ceased. He filled book after book, each ending where the next began, in the ruins. When he died, no one claimed his body. The cabin decayed, its roof collapsing under rain. But inside, the papers survived. Hundreds of pages bound by string, all titled "The Ruin of Men." Decades later, a railway survey uncovered the land again. Workers unearthed fragments of iron and bone, a tarnished watch, and one key still gleaming faintly despite the years. They turned it over in silence. That night, the foreman heard voices through the trees, low, indistinct, like men arguing underwater. He dismissed it as wind until one voice spoke clear as thunder. "You never let me go." No one returned after that. The tracks were rerouted, the site fenced off. And yet every few years someone reported seeing lanterns in the woods, moving as if carried by hands that remembered their purpose. Historians pieced together what they could. They called it the Rutledge Mystery, an academic phrase meant to bury discomfort beneath scholarship. But those who read Elias's final words knew it wasn't mystery. It was inheritance. Every man leaves behind the echo of his choices. Some fade with time. Others ring forever in the hollow where conscience used to live. The line was carved into the cabin wall, burned deep into the wood. Today, the ruins lie beneath ivy and silence. Hikers who strayed too close describe a sudden drop in temperature, a pressure behind the eyes, and the faint sound of breathing when no one else is near. Some say the land is cursed. Others say it simply remembers. But the truth, if it exists, remains the same as it was that final night. Two men, bound by obsession, standing before the fire they built together. The fire didn't end with them. It traveled quietly through every man who touched their story, through every word rewritten, every truth softened, every sin disguised as fascination. Flames change shape, but they never die. And if you walk there now, beneath the heavy branches, you'll still find embers glowing faintly under the soil. Not enough to burn, just enough to remind you that ruin, like memory, breathes. When the wind shifts, it carries the scent of ash and rain. Listen closely, and you might hear the faint echo of footsteps pacing inside the dark. Two of them, always two, never stopping. Because some men never leave the places they destroyed. They live there still, whispering through time, asking whoever passes one question the earth itself can't answer. When does forgiveness finally begin?